I'm looking after what we call digital channels and emerging payments in the regions, which means I have teams that are a little bit all over the world implementing digital solutions with our customers, and I'm also looking after the relationships with Apple, Google, Facebook, Samsung, Xiaomi, and all these entities which are not traditionally our customers, but are actually extremely important in the payments ecosystem that is starting to emerge. And what I'd like to talk a little bit about is the consumer, because if we're all sitting here and making a living, it's because there is a consumer out there who is helping us making a living. And Kevin already mentioned that consumers are changing very fast now. We are probably looking at the biggest disruption in payments since MasterCard's existence, and that's about 48 years. And that is that the consumer who used to be quite happy with plastic is now moving to connected devices. They do that for interacting with each other, they do that for entertaining themselves, they do that to educate themselves, and they also do that to shop and transact. Right? And if you're in a business that traditionally is working with plastic, well, you better find a way to navigate that transition and to offer those consumers what they need. And I think the same counts for all of you, I guess. And if you think about what they need, and this is a bit of a cliche, it's kind of three things essentially, right? They need security, that's kind of table stakes, but we have a lot of work to do. They need convenience, and again, that's pretty obvious, and if there's one thing that these digital players have taught us is, what it really means, what it really means to be focused on the user experience and to make it convenient without road bumps. And the third thing that we are very convinced about, it means ubiquity. A consumer cannot live with 30 different payment tools for 30 different environments. He just wants one. And Kevin said, maybe maximum two. And two, that means not just to pay at their preferred merchants, but to pay at all merchants, online and offline, cross-border and domestic, etc. And so those are really guiding principles that when we think about digital payments, you have to keep top of mind. And so let me talk a little bit about these three, and then we can debate about who will win that race for the consumer, right? Because that's really what we're talking about. The dice are rolling, they will stop in a couple of years, 2 years, maybe 3 years, but by then the fog will have lifted and we'll know where the consumer is trending towards. So on security, I think as an industry we've made lots of investment, right? We mentioned earlier on chip and pin and all that, but the reality is that there's still a lot of MaxStripe cards out there. The reality is that there are thousands of card on file systems all over, which are potential points of compromise. And the reality is that there's a lot of non-authenticated transactions. Online transactions, by and large, remain non-authenticated, which means, obviously, it means lots of fraud. Now, if you think that we're in a shifting industry, that lots of the current payments that we know is shifting to digital, and we know that that's a kind of shaky ground, well, you better fix that shaky ground, right? You cannot build an industry with weaknesses on security, or somebody else will fix it for you. And so we've done a lot of work around security where, I guess the prime example of a lot of what I'm talking about is actually the Apple Pay execution. Apple Pay is just one environment of many that will be enabled with the same mechanisms, but I think it's helpful to kind of have an anchor to explain that, right? So to give you a sense of what security means in this environment, it's actually essentially four things. First thing is, we need a way better system to do identification of the consumer. I need to make sure when I load payment details in a digital device or a digital environment that I know Kirsten is Kirsten and not somebody else. Right? And tying the person to the card, to the device, is a critical component that is non-standardized and that we need to standardize. And so with Apple Pay, we've done that now in the US, we're moving that elsewhere as well. The second piece is we need to swap out the real card and put something else in place. It's what we call tokenization. It's basically saying whatever goes into devices, whatever goes into card on file systems later on, is not the real credential, not the real 16-digit PAN. It's a different one that if it gets lifted, we render it useless. And how do we render it useless? Well, we add to that fake PAN, we add layers of cryptography to make it as secure as an EMV chip transaction for digital, right? So that is, the third component. And the fourth component is we need to make sure we authenticate at the moment of transaction as well, so that even if the credential is very secure and all that, that if Kevin has somebody else's phone, he can actually not pay with it without authentication. And that authentication is moving very fast to biometrics, right? We're used to static passwords. Nobody likes static passwords. You forget them, especially I have many of them, and static passwords are notoriously compromisable. We need to move away from that, and obviously those digital tools give us the ability to do biometrics, like the fingerprint on the iPhone. But again, the world is moving fast. We're moving to wearables already. We're moving to connected cars, connected or smart TVs and all that. That authentication method will change, right? The next version of the wearables will be what we call persistent authentication. You get on in the morning, you kind of pair your bracelet with your phone, it measures your heartbeat, and you don't have to authenticate yourself anymore, right? It's the cardiac pattern which will make sure that actually Jorn is Jorn and nobody else can imitate that pattern, and that's how you get away from the road bumps. So securing that is from our perspective almost a re-architecting of the digital space, and which for you will result in less fraud, less administration of fraud, less declines, because we can demonstrate to the issuer that Kevin is Kevin. So that's that security piece, table stakes, but a lot of work happening, and you need to kind of anticipate what that means for your own business. Convenience is kind of also an obvious one, but frankly today in online payments there's a lot of key entry happening still. Trying to do that on a small mobile screen is really quite an exercise. It doesn't work unless we fundamentally change that. Somebody else will do that for us. So we need to get that information streamed in a very simple method. Even if some players have solved for that, we're still looking at lots of card on file data. You don't like, having your stuff into multiple places is not exactly convenient. Again, there's the whole password problem. And then even if we kind of get to authentication today, 3D secure or secure code means that you put road bumps in the way for consumers. Nothing that you guys like, nothing that we like, because you see abandonment. Right? Again, working with these digital players has helped us tremendously to think through what it means, a convenient solution. How do we actually get rid of these road bumps? And I don't know if any of you have experienced the kind of a solution like Apple Pay, but frankly, there are no road bumps, right? The thing lights up, you put your finger down, and off you go, and you have your fully authenticated transaction. That is the experience that will have to become ubiquitous throughout. Those are the experiences that will win, and I actually believe that we'll see, a few of those take over the majority of payments in a few years from now. And then the third point is ubiquity. And so, what this means is, firstly, we need to make sure that a solution works cross-border. Having a domestic-only solution, having the French standing up their own domestic solution in a world that is digital and therefore non-territorial is not going to work. Consumers will want to shop cross-border, certainly online, but because merchants are everywhere, and as consumers don't even know. But even physically, right? I came from Heathrow this morning. I kind of took the Heathrow Express and then the tube, and I paid with my Apple phone on the tube. It's great. It's much better than standing in line trying to get your ticket out of the machine, hoping that the credit card will work and all that, right? And at rush hour, you kind of whiz through it, and it's fantastic. People will expect that. People will not kind of keep up with having to deal with different instruments because they happen to be traveling. But it also means crossing in-store and online. Right? If you have a tool that works online and you need something different to work in store, because you're a digital consumer, you want to kind of pay in store, it's not going to work. You need to cross both. And again, you can like or dislike Apple. One thing that they do well is to anticipate what consumers want, and they study this very, very well. Their solution, right from at the gate, crosses both online and in store. It's fundamental. They've chosen NFC, which is a great thing because we happen to believe that that is the most secure and the most implementable solution that also rides existing rails out there. But it is a fundamental thing. Anything else, over time, we'll have trouble kind of keeping the consumer hooked. And it also means interoperable, right? So consumers will download apps. You know, if you like to eat at Wagamama, you might be convinced to download the Wagamama app. But are you really going to put your credentials, your payment credentials, in the Wagamama app? You know, even if you like that food a lot, I mean, how often are you really going to go there? Is it really worthwhile doing that, right? So whatever your tool is, it needs to be able to cross multiple merchant solutions and not one at a time. You know, the other day I was meeting with a railway operator, and they have this beautiful little app that they're really very proud of. You know, you can select your journey and choose your departure time and arrival time and have the different options and all that. It says, this is a great app. And then once you've chosen your journey, then you go and stand in line and buy your ticket. I said, gee, you know, I need help because I'm actually a relatively small railway operator. I can't myself convince consumers to put their credentials into my account file. And actually I don't want, because I don't want to have all the hassle. They actually want to have an interoperable solution out there, and today we're not quite there. So who's going to win, right? So we believe that those digital players have actually a decent chance to offer these solutions. Why? Because they have a great, consumer affection. They are focused on the consumer, or they're obsessed about the consumer experience. They own the OS, and that's a huge asset that they have. They're natively digital and have huge reach. Having said that, we're not going to just let these players do what they want, right? Because we all know that they're obsessed with data. They're not always as diligent around data privacy than banks could be. So we have a few rules of engagement with them, which is to say that the 16-digit PAN needs to be the credential. Any other contraption that they invent is not something that we can endorse. The merchant of record has to be the merchant of record. We're not allowing Apple, for example, to say, oh, Apple is the merchant of record, and all the merchants behind it get a different settlement mechanism. That just increase opacity in the system, and we need transparency. It also breaks loyalty schemes that merchants have in place. We need to make sure that the brands of the banks are well represented, because ultimately it is the bank that offers the payment service. It is the bank that takes liability for these transactions and takes the fraud risk. And we need to make sure that the data remains as is. It's the consumer's data. Payments cannot be the way of these digital players to siphon off data and kind of be a big brother for consumers, right? And that's why I'm saying these digital players have a good chance, but banks have an equally good chance. Banks are there, and I'm wrapping up. Banks have the brand and the trust for the consumers for their payment services. All of you probably have a mobile banking app. Expanding that towards payment is not such a big deal for the banks. They can actually pull this off. We have the tools that help them do that. But you as merchants and merchant providers need to make sure that this digital stream for these different types of payments is accepted. And I run out of time, but after that we can have a bit of a chat about what is it therefore that you have to start doing. Right.